We're gonna play Overwatch in a bit, but I watching some old videos over the weekend of just really old like Overwatch League stuff from when it first came out, like season one stuff. And it kind of made me fall down a rabbit hole of different metas and like how the game has evolved. Yeah, everybody cries and complains that tanks took over the game, that tanks ruined the game, that tanks are super OP because they've defined so many metas. And I found a list of metas that have they're not it's not like a super complete list. It ended at 2020. Um and we'll kind of see why these things happen the way they did, I guess. I just thought it was super interesting and I kind of just want to take a look at it and see how many of the metas I can remember playing in, and see how many of those comments about tanks were right. This was the Reddit post. It was made fucking 2 years ago almost. I just thought it was super interesting. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this or talked about it already. This is my first time seeing it though. So this quick rundown. As you'll see, we played in GOATs for a while. Before we go into that, there's a couple things to actually know about this. A majority of the player base in this game never truly experienced GOATs. Let's get that out of the way now. A majority of the people in this game were not playing at a high enough level to where they really had to play with GOATs. So the complaints about GOATs weren't 100% warranted. I can understand the complaints about GOATs when it comes to Overwatch League and watching the Overwatch League, because we saw GOATs for a really, really, really long time. But in terms of I'm so tired of playing against GOATs, I'm pretty sure 90% of the community never truly played against GOATs. And if they did play against GOATs, it was a really butchered form of it, and it wasn't very good. I'd say very similar things about Double Shield. I think Double Shield is a bit easier to come by than GOATs. To be fair, it's way easier of a comp to pull off. But I think in general, I'd say like 75 to 80% of the community didn't have to deal with these really strong metas because they weren't playing in a high enough SR bracket for them to actually matter. Same thing for when Dive was super strong. You know, there was a really long time when Dive was the comp to go. Even though I still think it is the comp to go, it's an incredibly hard comp to pull off, and it's just not. It's like not a comp that you can realistically pull off on a ladder. People complain about Dive. None of us really had to play in Dive all that often anyways. You know? Let's just go in. Season 1. Where it all started. This is when there wasn't a hero limit. People remember way back when Overwatch 1 released. Fucking 6 years ago at this point almost. There wasn't a limit on how many heroes that you could pick. So you could have multiples of a hero. So people would pick pretty disgusting shit. We won't go too deep into this because it was kind of like the Wild West of Overwatch. There was a whole lot of nasty shit that happened, but even here you can see, like, even from the start, Winston, Tracer, Lucio, always going to be strong. Winston kind of falls off for a while. I remember there was a really long time where people didn't really think Winston was good. I think there's a couple reasons why people didn't really think Winston was good, but we can go over that later. But even here you can see this is like kind of setting the pace for the game, right? This is not this slow-paced video game where we kind of sit behind shields like people really like to think. Even today, 6 years later, people love to think this. I think Reinhardt's shield had even more HP back then, and people still weren't supposed to play like that. So, you know, that's why I think Dive is the comp that it's the comp that we're seeing now in Overwatch 2. And I think it's probably the best comp in terms of high level play. Because this game's fast, man. You need to be able to play fast. You need to be able to play coordinated, and Dive is that comp. Season 2, when Ana was actually released, or she was at least sometime in here. Ana's released here. We get character lock, so you can't have multiples of a character. Yeah, Beyblade meta. I vaguely remember playing this. I think I wasn't really playing it this time. I remember playing a lot on release, and then I remember coming in a bit late for Ana release. But what was Beyblade? For people who were playing back then, Ana on release, instead of having a damage reduction on her nano, she would give you a movement speed boost. So what people would do is they would run this rush comp, and then they would nano Reaper, and he would go super fast, and they would speed boost Reaper, and he would go super fast, and then he would ult, and everything would die. Obviously, see Ryan Zarya. That's usually the go-to thing when you see a Reinhardt. You pair him with a Zarya. Same thing with Reaper. You bubble the Reaper. He can't really be stopped. I'm not sure how many people are actually playing D.Va, though. Common hero. I think if this was being played today, you would see D.Va 100% of the time. They would either do a very similar thing as you would with the Zarya bubble, where you would just DM over the Reaper and like eat the sleeps or the antis or whatever. Or you'd play it to counter the Reaper. I don't think you'd really see Zarya. Triple tank. Nano visor. I really remember from this meta. This was the meta where I really thought... I used to be one of you guys. I used to think tanks were super OP. And then my eyes opened, and I realized this game is full of nonsense. Yeah, tanks were... Undeniably, tanks were pretty good for a while. I think there's a couple reasons for that, though. I think Roadhog was pretty obscene back in the day. Not only was his hook super broken, but he did do a ton of damage, which I think gets nerfed in the next patch. His damage gets nerfed at some point, right? So they fixed the hook here somewhere. No longer pulls around corners. Roadhog was just a fucking menace, man. People were just worse back in the day, so focus fire wasn't as good. Ana players weren't as good back in the day, so you know, hogs weren't being kept in check as well. I don't think people really thought about Zen all that often. I think if they did think of Zen as like a hog counter, they'd probably play him over the soldier, maybe. And then you'd see a really early version of goats. I don't really know for sure though. Yeah, tanks were, I mean, it was really just Hog. Hog was kind of a ridiculous character. And he would just kind of shit on people because people were bad. And the focus fire wasn't there, and people weren't checking their flanks as well. And even when they were, I mean, his hook was super buggy all the time, and then he'd get the hook, and he just one-shot you, and he would just do that over and over again. So, people just played tanks, you know? You see D.Va come in, D.Va just flies after the hook, DMs the hook, so he doesn't one-shot people. Reinhardt is just a beefy dude. I'm kind of surprised that we saw Soldier over Tracer, though. Maybe Soldier was like... Soldier did a ton of damage on this patch, though, didn't he? I think, at some point they lower his damage, and then they raise it again, and then... Soldier's always been in this really weird loop where they, like... Where he has high damage, and then they're like, this character does way too much fucking damage, and then they nerf his damage a little bit, and then it's like, oh, this character doesn't do anything, and nobody's playing him, so they up his damage again. That kind of patching has happened on a ton of different characters. It's happened on Zenyatta a couple times. It's happened on Soldier. It happened on Roadhog for a while. Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. So there'll be a point where Soldier kind of falls out of the meta, and then he comes back. We're seeing Dive again. Triple DPS, early Dive. Let's try and figure out why the meta shifts. On barrier shield generator. Yeah, this one Symmetra went through a whole rework phase. P-shift. Hog's hook was less buggy. Maybe that was like the biggest reason why. See, sometimes metas just shift, you know? Sometimes people just find shit. I feel like people just found shit earlier on in the game. We'll see later on The meta doesn't shift for a really long time. I think there's a few reasons for that, but I think ultimately it's people kind of just start to stagnate. So we played Dive. Okay. Triple DPS. Makes sense. Love Soldier. He ultimately gets his damage nerfed. So I assume there will be less Soldier. Orisa gets added in. Damage decrease on Ana. Ana used to do 80 damage. I think it's like 70 now, right? I don't think it's still 60. It has to be 70 because she 3 shots 200 HP. I remember what they nerfed about Lucio. I had to guess it was probably like a healing thing. Lucio's always been a fucked up character though. Since forever in Overwatch. This character is ridiculous. Fucking Lucio players will cry that Lucio's not good. Let's see it happen. This character's nutty. This character's nuts. She's like a 4th DPS in this meta who can just heal and make people faster. Lucio's always been crazy. Season 5. This is like closer to the dive that you would see today. You wouldn't see Mercy Lucio, but these 4 make sense. So another season of dive. Deadeye I think is faster here. Oh yeah, this one Reaper doesn't get his orbs anymore. He gets lifesteal. This is the Hog changes, so his damage is decreased, but he gets an extra shot and he shoots faster. I think this is really when like the downfall of Hog kind of came in for a while. It's the decrease in damage. This is kind of where his identity shifts from like a flanking one-shotter who's just destroying DPS because they're really bad, and he's like a shield breaker at this point almost. Sorry, Grav disables mobility abilities. I don't remember for sure if people were like blinking and swift striking out of it. Maybe they were. I know for a really long time there was a ridiculous interaction that Reinhardt can do that I didn't see a lot of people do, but I feel like they should have done more, where you would Earth Shatter in a Grav, and if you spammed charge, you would be able to charge out of the Grav. I feel like more people should have been doing that. But another season of dive. At that point, people were all complaining about dive. Everybody today is like, we love dive. Dive is this super skill intensive comp. And it is a super skill intensive comp. This is probably the hardest comp in the game to play. But at this point, everybody was complaining about dive. I couldn't tell you how obnoxious it was to hear people complain about dive. And you want to know what? They complain about every single meta afterward as well. There is not a single meta in Overwatch where people are happy. They'll all tell you that dive is the gold standard. And I think dive is probably the most fun, in my opinion. Second most fun. I'll tell you the most fun later, and you'll be shocked. But everyone bitched and moaned about dive when dive was the thing. When dive was super good, everyone complained about it. Don't let these kids fool you. Everybody hated dive too. Overwatch is very similar to the fighting game community in a way that everybody complains about the current thing until it becomes the old thing, and then everyone was like, let's go back to the old thing. It was so much more honest back then. You saw it in Street Fighter 4. Everybody bitched and moaned and said Street Fighter 4 was bullshit. Unblockables were stupid. Oki in that game was stupid. Yun was stupid. Elena was stupid. And then you saw Street Fighter 5, and everyone was like, Street Fighter 4 is this masterpiece of a video game. It's like poetic. It's artwork. You're just painting on a canvas every time you're playing it. It's nonsense. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to these people who say dive is the gold standard and you're fucking Van Gogh when you're playing dive. It's all nonsense. This game is always full of nonsense. Don't believe these guys. This is my least favorite patch of all time. Without even reading the patch notes, I can tell you why Junkrat's meta, and I hate this fucking character, and I've always hated him. This is the patch where Junkrat gets 2 conch mines. I fucking hate this character. Junkrat gets 2 conch mines, and if you played a Mobile Heroes, you had a bad time. You would just conch mine around the map and fucking one-shot you. It happened all the time. People said, fuck that. We're gonna play Pharah and Winston, and we're just not gonna stay on the ground. The Zarya would just stick with the Zenyatta. Back to dive. This is closer to the dive that we know now. This is when Valk was originally reworked. So they took out, when did they take out mass res? Here, it's on this patch. So instead of the mass res that she originally had, Mercy has the ult that she has now, except res. She'd be able to instant res like 3 times. It was crazy. She would res before the Valk, and then she would res again after the Valk, after she did Valk, because it would reset the cooldown, and then the cooldown would be reduced, so she'd get like 1 or 2 more reses in a fight. This character was disgusting. This character would just win you team fights with ult. I mean, it's not much different than old Mercy, because old Mercy would just hide with ult, and she would let your entire team die and let the enemy waste all their resources, and then she'd mass res 5 people and you'd win the fight. Moira was added. I also hate this character. Ana has the damage that she has now. They added a cast time to res. I think this is the first time we really see Zenyatta in a meta. No, he's played last meta too. What did they do to Zen in the last patches that made him playable now? Maybe people just figured out that Zen was good with dive, but I'm guessing. The game just started evolving. Back to a hog meta. This when fucking Moira was introduced, the game was just an all-out slugfest. People learned really early on that Moira did so much healing that you didn't actually need to play healers so that you could go back to Lucio. At this point in the game, goats didn't come out and start being played until Brig was introduced into the game. It was sometime after Brig was introduced. It was like pretty early on when Brig was introduced. But at this point, when Moira was released, you could have played goats and it would have been seen as the best comp in the game still. That's how good Moira was. And how good goats actually was. I think if people figured out that goats was the best meta at this point, I think this game would have died off so fast. Because people, when goats was a thing, for some reason, people just stopped thinking about how to counter goats and they just picked goats. I think part of the reason was because Brig was just such an egregious character when she came out that people were so fucking... They were just so salty, and they were so tired of dealing with her. They were like, fuck it, we'll just all play it. At the highest level, at least. At the lowest level, people still played nothing. All the way up to, like, Masters, Grandmasters, you weren't playing goats. Goats was not a thing in any of these SR brackets. I'd say even in Masters, you probably weren't playing it. Maybe High Masters. Hog, though. Why people just didn't play Rhine? Maybe they just... Because it's fucking Tracer, Genji, Lucia. I mean, you're just never gonna hit a Tracer, Genji, or a Moira with a Reinhardt. So I guess they just played the Hog. Kind of makes sense. We're back to dive again. Sombra was another hero too, where Sombra was seen as being really bad for a really long time. Non-competitive until season 10. So Brig was released. Then we get Grab Dragon, double Sniper, and then we start seeing the early goats. Sombra buffs, making a strong choice from dive. Sombra's always been... I don't know, man. I always hated playing against Sombra. I think Sombra was, I don't really want to say better back then than she was now. Because now she's pretty fucking stupid. What was it about Sombra back then that people just didn't play her? I know some teams did, but a lot of teams didn't. And when you did play her, it was kind of... Maybe it was just because she was too hard at the time. You just didn't really know. Because people, when they did play her, you kind of gave up a support slot. And you'd play her as a support. Because back then, when she would hack health packs, and people would use them to heal, she would gain ult charge from that. They would just hack... You would just, like, take space around health packs and play around hacked health packs. And you'd use that as healing instead of playing another support. I can't really remember if there was like another reason other than they just didn't want to give up damage. Because obviously she didn't do as much damage as other characters. Did she not hack every ability at that time? I don't really remember as much with Sombra. I remember I didn't really like her, but I also know I didn't really play against her all that often. I think at the time she was just too hard to use. And I don't really remember how her originally hacked worked. Because I thought it was, she just hacked you like she did now. But if she didn't take away all of your abilities, maybe it was pretty bad. But anyway, when people did play her, they would just swap out a support for her. Oh, I remember why they did this. So when Zenyatta's right click used to be way faster when he would shoot you. And people would bitch and cry that he was killing them too fast. Because he would just annihilate people. So they reduced the fire rate, so people would get one shot less. Oh yeah, this when Diva had rockets too. I think that's why. That's part of the reason why Diva was played so much. When did she get her rockets? Yeah, I forgot about that. She didn't have rockets for a while. When they introduced rockets, that character was out of this fucking world annoying. When they gave her rockets, she would just fly at DPS and just kill them. Oh my god. Avoid teammates? Oh my goodness. What a mechanic. Double sniper Ryan Zarya. Alright, so Brig kind of morphed this meta. So when Brig came out, Brig was actually the most disgusting character in the entire game. And as support main, I cannot take any pride in playing this character. This character was disgusting on release. I think her shield had more health, like a lot. Shield bash did more damage, I think. It was either shield bash or whip shot. I think it was shield bash. I think shield bash did more damage. Shield bash would hit people through shields, so she would shield bash a Reinhardt through his shield and stun him. I think the stun lasted longer. She did more healing. Her health packs were instant. She only had one charge, I think, but they were instant healing and they healed more. And I think they gave shields regardless of your health. Her ult was better. This character was disgusting. She would do literally anything she wanted. You couldn't play dive against her because she healed so much and she did so much damage. Couldn't play tracer against her because she would one-shot tracers. So the only thing people could think about is that you would just play this shit. And you would just play double snipers and you would try and kill the Brig. Try and like pick off a Zen or something. I'm sure Lucio was played... maybe not played more than these two. I find it hard to believe though that at this point people weren't playing Lucio constantly with Ryan Zarya. Because at this point, maybe people just didn't think about it back then. Because at this point, you're never seeing a Reinhardt in specific without a Lucio next to him. It's never gonna happen. Scatter arrow is such a dumb ability. Yeah, Rally gave more armor. Oh my god, dude, this character was just silly. And I love playing her. I loved playing her then, and I love playing her now. Ball was introduced. Another double sniper meta. This is when people figured out Grab Dragon was super strong. Another double sniper. Let's talk about goats. For people who don't know what goats was basically you didn't play any DPS. Played this comp, basically. I think sometimes people would swap out one of these characters for a Moira. Sometimes you would swap out the Zarya for a Hog. For the most part, yeah, I think Zen was like the goats for a while. I remember Zen. I remember all these. So basically what you would do is you would play as one clump and you would never spread out, and it would just be a 6 stack of people just running into another 6 stack of people. And I think goats was an absolute necessary evil. I think, in my opinion, it's the most fun comp to play because it requires the most teamwork. And I think this comp in particular forced people to get really good at this game. I think if this comp was never a thing, it would have taken people much longer to get really, really good at Overwatch. Like, obviously ult tracking and stuff and like cooldown tracking was a thing, but I think people thought of it as less important back then as you do now because of goats. Because goats was a battle of resources. There was times in goats fights where fights would go on for what seemed to be forever. Because there's no DPS. And it's just a bunch of tanky motherfuckers healing a ton. So it's just a big war of attrition and a battle for resources. And whatever team could stretch out their resources the longest and manage their resources the best would win the game. And I think because of that, it forced players to get really good at resource management and tracking the enemy resources and positioning. And I think if this never happened, Overwatch would be a different game. And I think people really hate goats because it was a meta in the game for a really, really long time. It was the meta in the game for a really long time. but I think this was probably my favorite time to play Overwatch. And back then, even still, towards the end of GOATS, I still bitched and complained that GOATS was too annoying and that I was tired of seeing GOATS and I wanted to see DPS again. So that's just part of the game. Every competitive game will go through a cycle like this, where you see one particular meta for too long and you bitch and complain and you say the game sucks. But in reality, it's just a phase in the game. I think at this time in particular as well, people started getting more complacent with comps. They saw how strong GOATS was and they were like, fuck it. We're not going to find an easy solution, so we're just going to play GOATS as well. Because even towards the end of GOATS, before they introduced role lock, what you see here, they introduced role lock. Even before they introduced that, people were finding solutions for GOATS. There were teams who were playing like quad DPS with like an Ana and Ball and like a Sombra, and that was the solution. Like that comp, I think, played really well into this. People were making like hit and run comps that they tried, and like that saw some success with like Sombra Tracer. There was like Winston Diva, I think, was in there. Like it was being busted open, but like Overwatch League was getting bigger, and it was the really hard thing about trying to make a counter comp to something like GOATS. GOATS was such a good comp then that it felt really hard to justify like picking another comp and like learning another comp, because it's not like you just theory craft a comp and it works. You have to like learn how to play the comp, and it's like, do we really want to spend all of our time in scrims trying out different comps to try and beat GOATS, or do we want to continue to play GOATS, which was already a super high skill cap team comp, and just perfect GOATS? And I think a lot of teams fell into that problem. But I think GOATS, even though a lot of people hated it, I think it was the most interesting time to play Overwatch. Even though I didn't get to play it a whole lot, because I definitely wasn't in these SR brackets. I think the small amount of times I did get to play it was super fun, and I think watching it was super interesting. I think this was like the start of the Shock being super dominant. I think they were strong before this point, I'm not mistaken, but they were just super disgusting in GOATS. Not only did they have the best Reinhardt as super, they had Choi, who was the best diva. They had Sinatra, who was the best Zarya at the time. They had Rascal, who was, I think Rascal played Brig for them, and Rascal was always one of the best players in the game. They had Moth, who was the best Lucio. He probably still is the best Lucio if he's still playing. But he's not in Overwatch League anymore. I think at this time they had Violet, who was the best Ana and Zen, and probably the best player in the game right now. Ashe is implemented. Oh, Kree. I think this was this right here was like the start of a Kree, a bad Kree time. I think everybody equates McCree being super OP when they give him 225 HP, but I think that character was nutty before then. This Flash Fan the Hammer was always in the game, and they increased the damage here. GOATS. When did they put in role lock? Baptiste. Oh my god, Baptiste too. See, everybody says tanks were super OP and tanks were in the game because of GOATS meta. But I think supports did more damage to this game than tanks did. And I'm a support main saying that. I think a lot of the times when there's a tank meta, or when certain tanks are being picked in certain metas, I think a lot of the times you're just playing tanks based around what the rest of the team is playing, or what is good. Like what is good in every other role. It also, a lot of it plays in the map as well. But I don't think people took map into consideration as hard as they do now. Map is much more important now than it was back then. Halt Hook. When people figured out that Halt Hook was super good. Baptiste in the game. I think people thought Baptiste was bad for a while. there's maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I remember Baptiste not being played a lot when he first came out. Maybe it's this Orisa change. Maybe that's why people played more Orisa. Probably it. Orisa, I think, even though it was played a lot towards the end of Overwatch 1, I think Orisa is I think it's more of a ranked pick than an Overwatch League pick, to be honest. People played Double Shield a ton towards the end of Overwatch 1, and it really didn't see as much success as the other comps did. That's because it's a super slow comp, and it's super one-dimensional, and faster comps will always be better, I think. I think faster comps with more variance to them and more team play to them will always see higher success. Like, people cry about Double Shield, but in reality, if you see Double Shield, you should just play Rush, and you'll beat Double Shield. Tank comps kind of, in a super simplified way, tank comps kind of work in like a triangle, right? And like the top corner of the triangle, you have like, we'll say Rush, right? And if you see Rush, you really want to play something with like a ton of mobility, so you're probably gonna play Dive. If you see Dive, you're like, well, I want to play something that just bunkers down and can't be dove easily, so we'll play Double Shield. And if you see Double Shield, you're like, I just want to run at them and just cleave them down because they can't stop us from sprinting at them. So you play Rush. And that's a super simplified version of looking at it. Hook, but you had double snipers. Hanzo was just super good in this meta. Storm Arrow was a fucking problem back then. Storm Arrow was crazy. I remember when they first implemented Storm Arrow, for a really long time after, that ability just made tanks' lives a living hell. Because if you played a shield tank, you just didn't have fun. Your shield was just gone. Roll Q, double shield, Sigma. Sigma will, I think, of all tanks put in this game and people crying about tanks, I think the only tank that was super overpowered and unfun to play against was Sigma. This character, I think, is the only character in the game that was as egregious as Brig on release. Sigma had, I think it was a 1600 HP barrier that he could put out and recall infinitely. Like, there was no cooldown on it like there is now. He did more damage and you couldn't cancel his ult. If he picked people up, you were getting slammed down and you couldn't cancel it. This character was insane. I think Sigma is the only tank who was actually overpowered in my opinion. Huge changes to Brig were, the shield was decreased. I think shield bash damage was decreased. He got 3 charges over healing. Again, double shield is going to be a super strong meta for the rest of the game now, and it's because it's just super easy to pull off. It doesn't mean double shield is the best comp in the game, and I think it's actually not. I think double shield is a really bad comp, but it's super easy to pull off on ladder. So you gotta think of Overwatch metas in 2 ways. You gotta think of it, what's good on ladder and what's good on stage. On stage, I think it's always gonna be dive. I think on stage, realistically, you should never be able to play double shield, because I think people should just know by now that you just had to play fast. Also, Baptiste was in the game at this point. Man, imagine if Goats was still a thing when Baptiste was released. Holy shit, that would have ruined the game. Baptiste is also a stupid character. I think Moira, Brig, Baptiste did more damage to this game than tanks could have ever done. And those are all characters, minus Moira, that I love playing. I love Brig and Baptiste. But these characters are toxic. These characters are insane. I think Brig was kind of a necessary evil. Not to the extent that she was, because she was too good. But I think towards the end of Overwatch 1, I think she was kind of a necessary evil. Because as you're seeing now in Overwatch 2, things are kind of super out of hand. Fights are all over the place, and there aren't a whole lot of answers to keep a lot of heroes in check. And I think Brig kept a lot of things in check, and we're seeing it now that it just doesn't happen. Like, Brig got to keep things like Reaper, like Mei, like Tracer, Sombra. You got to keep all these heroes in check. And when there's not a whole lot of CC in the game, they kind of just get to run free and they kind of just get to take over the games. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Because we're even starting to see now, pretty early on in the meta, or pretty early on in the league, that Ana isn't this like end-all be-all answer that's gonna save the game. Because we were kind of seeing Houston do it, but people are gonna figure out pretty quickly that if you just throw 3 people on the Ana, she can't sleep all you guys. You're just gonna kill the Ana and people are gonna do whatever they want. But this character's disgusting. Dude, I cannot express how much I hate Moira in this game. I think Moira is the worst character for this game. Oh, it's so bad. This character makes me hate Overwatch 2. Map is everything you could ever want in a support character, all thrown into one. His damage is crazy. He has the highest healing in the game next to Moira. Immortality is a disgusting ability that allows you to play like an absolute idiot and just not get punished for it. Amp Matrix is a super strong ability. Character's just nuts. It's too good. That's when we start seeing Sigma nerfs. Oh, this is every shield was getting nerfed here. Forgot about that because people were crying too hard about double shield. I think a big problem with Overwatch is people just don't want to learn. Because I really don't think double shield is this disgusting meta that's ruined the game. I think people just refuse to play the game correctly. Or play into this comp correctly. Because the way people play on ladder is you just sit in a choke. And you sit and you wait for things to die. When in reality, like, that isn't the game. The game was never played like that. It should have never been played like that. And people in these ELO brackets will, for some reason, always play the game like that. And that's why double shield is like super disgusting and why people hate it so much. It's because most people are in these ELO brackets and none of them know how to play against this. But again, like, I don't think it's this fucking disgusting comp that is unbeatable and it ruins the game. It ruins the fun for people. I think it ruins the fun for DPS players because DPS players don't want to move. They just want to sit behind their shield and shoot into another shield. Or double shield. Echo, another disgusting character. I think Echo is like the final nail in the coffin. We really broke down the heroes that I think really turned Overwatch into like some silly shit. The game's always been silly. Don't get it twisted. This game has always been kind of ridiculous. As we've seen by this. The game's always had dumb shit and it will always have dumb shit. It's like every competitive game. But if we were to look at the heroes that I think are like super egregious and I think really turn the game for worse, let's say on release Brig negatively impacted the game. We'll say on release Brig because I think Brig now, or towards the end of Overwatch 1, I think she was fine. I think people still had a really sour taste in their mouth because of goats and because of her on release thing, but I think she really isn't that bad now. What else? Baptiste. This character is silly. I think he enables really silly play. And it's just so fucking hard to kill the enemy team when there's a Baptiste. This character's a cheater hero. Like, people can't die when he's on your team. And he outduels DPS. We'll say Echo. Echo is a gross character, man. Her damage is insane. She just spams at everything forever, and her damage is crazy. Focusing Beam is a ridiculous ability. For anybody who doesn't know what Focusing Beam does, is it's a tickle beam until you're at half HP or below. And then it does quad damage to you and absolutely melts you. And it works on shields. Sticky bombs are really good. Her primary fire is really good. She has crazy mobility. Her ultimate is probably the best ultimate in the game. It's a little worse than Overwatch 2 now. just because of like the health changes they've made to it. But her ult would allow her to turn into other heroes on the enemy team. She would just pick a hero on the enemy team. She would become that hero, and she would have all of their abilities, and her ult would charge like 3 times as fast as the enemy heroes. And if an echo changed to you, let's say the enemy team has a Moira and the echo changes to Moira, that Moira can't swap off of Moira until the echo ult is done, which is silly. That doesn't come into play a whole lot, but when there's a ton of stuff, a ton of maps that you could stall on, it actually kind of affects it then. Like if she ults a tank and you're on last point and you're trying to stall and the tank can't swap to something like ball, it kind of fucks them. Can't really say Junkrat because Junkrat was really only super good for like a patch or two. Sigma. We'll put Moira first. Moira, Sigma, or anyone else? Honestly, I think Mei. I think this character for way too long was not utilized as much as she should have been. This character has always kind of been just crazy. I think this character has always been nuts. People just didn't play her a whole lot. But we won't say Moira, or we won't say Mei. I think Mei is always going to be good. I think more people should have played her back then. And they were kind of figuring out how good she was now, or how good she really is towards the end of Overwatch 1. We're seeing her a lot more. I think these are these 5. I think these 5 are what really Sombra. These 6. Maybe Symmetra too, man. Because towards the end of Overwatch, when people figured out that Symmetra was stupid, and when they gave her the when she has like infinite ammo shooting at shields, that shit's silly. Yeah, we won't play Symmetra. Symmetra went way too long without any love, without people figuring her out. But when they gave her the ammo regen on shooting shields and changed her ult to be that big wall, I think that was kind of like a downfall for that hero. Before, she was really annoying, but she wasn't like good. I think now she's really annoying and she was really good. Especially when people just love playing double shield. Essentially, if there's a Symmetra on the enemy team, you just can't play shields. Or if you do, you have to play super fast. People don't like playing super fast. Anyone else? People will make an argument for Ball, but I don't think Ball was as crazy as people like to say. The character is pretty nuts, but I think Ball was kind of forced into the meta. I think there was a really weird time where tanks were like just unplayably bad. And it's kind of like that now in Overwatch 1, where it felt really, really bad to play any tank. And I think Ball was kind of the outlier there because he could kind of just do things. But I think in a world where tanks are actually good and they're playable and they don't feel horrible, I think Winston's better. But Ball kind of got to play like a DPS and kind of just got to do his own thing. Make an argument for Ashe, maybe. I don't really think she made the game worse, but I think she very quickly became the best hit scan in the game for a really, really, really long time, making it kind of pointless to play Cassidy in Widowmaker. There was like half a patch where Bastion was unkillable. That was pretty funny. You could say maybe Hanzo. There's an argument for him. I think Hanzo has never been in a good spot. I think when Scatter Arrow was good, he was super toxic and people hated playing against him because he would just one-shot people with Scatter Arrow. And I think with Storm Arrow, there was a point where he was one-shotting people with that anyways, and you can never play shields against him. So I think there's an argument for Hanzo, maybe. Maybe there's an argument for Reaper. I think Reaper's just a silly character. I don't think he's like super OP, but I think he's pretty obnoxious. He's like a skill check character. Early Hog you can make an argument for, but I don't think he really ruined the game like these guys did. Overwatch 1, fun game. Always had bullshit. Don't let people tell you it was ever honest. So, final thoughts before we move on to gaming. Plenty of reasons why you can not like Overwatch, and I think it's okay to not be happy with the current state of Overwatch. I, for one, am not. I don't really Enjoy Overwatch 1. Not enjoy Overwatch 1. I enjoy a lot of aspects to Overwatch 1. I don't enjoy Overwatch 2. I think it's okay. Not like either. I'm sure Overwatch 2 will evolve and be better, like Overwatch 1. Overwatch 2 will have its ups and downs, like Overwatch 1. But I think as a community, we should do a better job at being open with like criticisms without, how do I word this? We should take criticism better, and we should give better criticism, because this game is no different than any other competitive game that's ever been a thing. Every competitive game will always have ups and downs. It'll always have metas that people don't like and that people do like. It'll always have patches that are good and bad. It'll always happen. So rather than tear down the game and tear down the people who are enjoying it at the time, you should find ways to enjoy the game. If you don't enjoy the game and you don't think you can find any enjoyment in the game, then just stop playing the game and come back on a different patch. I've done that plenty of times in Overwatch 1, and I've done that in plenty of times in every other competitive game I've ever played. I think Overwatch goes through very similar things that the fighting game community does. Being a part of both communities and following both communities pretty closely, I feel like both communities complain about very similar things, and they fall into very similar traps. And I think both communities, we should do better jobs at not falling into those traps. Just being less grumpy. I think it's perfectly fine to be grumpy, and I think we're all humans, and we're gonna fall into times where things are just obnoxious. Get grumpy about them. But I think there's times where we need to need to get over the grumpy. Just play the game that we love. Because in all reality, we can all say that we hate Overwatch. We hate the way current Overwatch is. But the reason why we keep playing the game is because we love the game. I don't think this video will do anything spectacular to the community. I don't think a whole lot of people will watch it, but it's fun to make.